This is the first video in a series of videos where we will explore the nature of the ego. Now, I will call this the Dissolving the Ego series, and this will be an ongoing series every now and again that we will take a deep dive into the nature of the ego and try and explore the nature of who we truly are. So we will go from what you really are to what you've become and the return to who you truly are. This kind of process that we go through in the spiritual process. So in this first episode, I'm going to speak about the original face. Now we hear this term in Zen, the original face. Now this is similar to the uncarved block in Taoism that Lao Tzu talks about, the uncarved block. So our true nature before it was warped, before socialization. Now in Zen they talk about, do you know your original face before you were born, right? So this is the Atman in Vedanta, the undifferentiated consciousness. Before we become the ego, before we become Jason and everyone who is listening and watching. And so a lot of us don't know our original face. Now our original face, as we are born as a human being, we are still the original face, right? Before the socialization process begins. And that usually begins at a fairly young age because our subconscious is completely turned on from 1 to 5. But the innocence of a child is still there. The innocence of the original face is still there. This is why we hear a lot in the spiritual practices of the East that we need to return to our childlike nature. They're talking about going back to your original face, that innocence that we have as a child. Now you have that innocence because your mind is not polluted with the world and the conditioning that the world has, the socialization process that the world is. You're not conditioned with any of that yet. And so that's what the original face is. And so when we are in the bardo plane, so to speak, before we take on a rebirth, we are in our original face. And we are still the original face when we come into our form. And one teacher explained it to me, when we see the joy in a child, that is because they have just come from the source. They still understand the nature of reality. And we were all once in that place. Before education came in, before our parents told us who to be, before society condemned us for who we aren't. And so our original face is who we truly are. The ego is who we truly are not. It's the accumulation of socialization, the accumulation of conditioning. Now, the original face is equanimous, naturally. Its nature is empty, spontaneous, and free. That's the nature of our mind, actually. And so the original face is basically the nature of our mind, which is empty, spontaneous, and free. In South Korea, Taoist teachers often say, wiping the Tao. Now, what they mean by this, the Taoist teachers in South Korea, when they say wiping the Tao, they're talking about cleaning the mind back to the original face, about getting rid of the conditioning, wiping the Tao. And unfortunately, a lot of people in South Korea who are laymen will make fun of the Taoist teachers in that sense, which is a whole other story. But the point is, we need to return to that original face. The process through our life is to return to that original face, which I'll get to in further videos. But we're talking just about the original face today. And so, as I said, with Lao Tzu in Taoism, the original face is the uncarved block. Now, you often hear Lao Tzu say that we need to return to the uncarved block. Now, the uncarved block is the nature of wood before it comes into the hands of the craftsman, before it comes into the hands of the world, so to speak, of the human mind, to warp its nature, to shape it according to how the mind wants it to be, which is actually the opposite metaphor as we find in Confucianism, where Confucius has the carving and polishing metaphor because he believes in the self-cultivation model. Now, a lot of people in spirituality often think in the sense of cultivation. Now, it is good to go through a cultivation process to disintegrate the ego, but the ultimate practice is to realize that you are fundamentally pure, empty, free, and spontaneous. You are liberated as you truly are. as the original face, as the uncarved block. But we invested into the cultivation method. We invested into self-cultivation. And Lao Tzu actually criticizes the cultivation method because he says all you need to do is return to the uncarved block. You are the uncarved block. Your nature is still wood, even though you've shaped it and contorted it. Your nature is still wood. This is Lao Tzu's point. And so, before you get invested into a cultivation process, maybe you need to understand who you truly are as the uncarved block, as the original face. We need to contemplate who we were before we were born. We need to contemplate who we were before the socialization process. And who we were was the original face, the uncarved block. As the original face, you are not bothered by anything. You are completely equanimous. You are untouched by the wheel of samsara, by the wheel of birth, life, and death and rebirth. You are completely untouched by this cycle, by this process, because you are fundamentally the original face. And the original face cannot be moved by the winds of change. It is beyond change. It is the changeless. It is the ever-present. It is always now. It was never born. It can never die. It has no form. It is formless. But it animates the form. It is immanent within all things, and yet transcends all things. This is the original face. This was your true nature. And so your original face is unstained, pure. No emotion can stain it. No feeling can stain it. No external form of conditioning or agency can stain it. That is your original face. Untouched, completely pure. That's who we truly are. That's what we were before we were born, and that's what we were before the socialization process took place. Now my question to you is, do you identify as the original face, or do you identify with the socialization process of the ego that you've become? Shanti, shanti, shanti.